Good evening and welcome. A man accused of having drugs for supply was refused bail this morning after Gardaí alleged he threatened that 2 witnesses would be shot. 58-year-old Patrick Eugene Holland, of no fixed address, was remanded in custody for a week at Kilmainham District Court. Gardaí also claimed he interfered with 2 other witnesses by allegedly coercing them to withdraw statements.
58-year-old Patrick Eugene Holland, of no fixed abode, was brought to Kilmainham District Court under Garda escort from Lucan Garda Station this morning. Sergeant Patrick Kennedy told the court that he arrested Mr. Holland at 6 minutes past midnight at Lucan Garda Station and that he and Sergeant Michael Nolan charged him. Patrick Eugene Holland was charged with possession of cannabis resin for the purpose of selling to another, contrary to Section 15 and Section 27 of the 1977 Misuse of Drugs Act, on a date unknown between the 1st of October 1995 and October the 6th last. Holland, who sat in the dock wearing a blue T-shirt and dark trousers, was identified to the judge Gillian Hussey by Sergeant Kennedy, who pointed to him and said he was the middle-aged man sitting in the dock wearing a beard. His solicitor, Jim Orange, applied for bail, but Gardaí objected on 5 grounds. Sergeant Kennedy said he was of the opinion the accused would abscond. He was of no fixed abode. Sergeant Kennedy said Mr. Holland had indicated he had sold his last known residence in Britas Bay. Sergeant Kennedy also alleged in evidence that Mr. Holland had threatened 2 prospective witnesses in this case that they would be shot, and that he allegedly interfered with 2 other witnesses by allegedly coercing them to withdraw statements already made. Sergeant Kennedy also objected to bail for Mr. Holland because of the seriousness of the charges. When questioned by defending solicitor Jim Orange as to the precise nature of the drugs charges against Mr. Holland, Sergeant Kennedy said he was not in a position to say where Mr. Holland had the drugs in his possession at the time, and that he was not in a position to give full figures in relation to the street value of the drugs. But Mr. Orange pressed him and told Judge Gillian Hussey he was not satisfied with this response. He put it to Sergeant Kennedy that he was applying to the court to refuse Mr. Holland bail on the basis of hearsay. The judge, however, said she was satisfied, but Mr. Orange said he was still dissatisfied and that he may have to make a bail application to the High Court. Judge Gillian Hussey refused 58-year-old Patrick Eugene Holland's application for bail, made on his behalf by his solicitor Jim Orange.
Good evening and welcome. Garda has told the Special Criminal Court that she believes the journalist Veronica Guerin was murdered by a suspected drugs dealer, Patrick Eugene Holland. Garda Marion Cusack, who arrested Holland at Dunleary in April this year, was giving evidence at the opening of his trial. He is charged with possessing drugs with intent to supply others. He has denied the charge.
There was heavy security around the Special Criminal Court today when Patrick Eugene Holland arrived for his trial on a charge of possession of cannabis with intent to supply between October 1995 and October 1996. He was arrested on April 9th of this year at Dunleary Port under Section 30 of the Offences Against the State Act on suspicion of the unlawful possession of a firearm at the junction of the Nace Road and Boot Lane on June 26, 1996. The arresting Garda, Marion Cusack, said she'd formed the opinion that he was the man who had shot Veronica Guerin on the same date. The first steps in the jigsaw leading to Holland's arrest began last October when Gardaí raided a lockup at the Greenmount Industrial Estate in Dublin. Prosecuting counsel Peter Charlton described the lockup as a drugs distribution centre on a massive scale. Gardaí found sufficient cannabis to make 470,000 cannabis cigarettes. They also seized 67 blank driving licences and sheets of paper with names, nicknames and figures. One of the names was The Wig, and the court heard this was a nickname used by Holland. The figures referred to drug quantities. 4 months later, the Gardaí raided the home of Angela and Patrick Holland at Britas Bay in County Wicklow. The superintendent who issued the warrant said he was reasonably satisfied that the firearm used in the murder of Veronica Guerin was to be found there. Gardaí did find 2 blank driving licences similar to those discovered in the Greenmount lockup. The court heard that Charles Bowden, who had rented the lockup using the alias Paul Conroy, will give evidence for the prosecution. Charles Bowden was the first person placed on a Garda witness protection programme established as part of the investigation into Veronica Guerin's death. He's serving a 6-year sentence for drugs and firearms offences. Bowden will identify Patrick Eugene Holland as the man known as The Wig and say he met him in the context of the drug distribution operation. He'll say that Holland took drug deliveries on a fairly regular basis for distribution to his own network of users and small-time pushers. The deliveries were arranged at a hotel off the Naas Road and other locations, including 2 bars. The prosecution say the operation of the Greenmount lockup was motivated by greed and profit at the expense of the people of Ireland, and Patrick Eugene Holland was part of that operation. The trial continues tomorrow.
Good evening and welcome. The first person to testify under the state's witness protection program has told the Special Criminal Court he cleaned and prepared the gun used to kill Veronica Guerin. He said he knew she was going to be shot, but he didn't know she was going to be murdered. Charles Bowden is the main prosecution witness in the trial of Patrick Eugene Holland, who denies a charge of possession of cannabis for sale or supply. Earlier in the trial, the Garda who arrested Holland said she believed he was the man who had shot Ms. Guerin.
33-year-old Charles Bowden was surrounded by tight security both inside and outside the Special Criminal Court for his appearance to give evidence against Patrick Eugene Holland. Up to 100 uniformed and plainclothes Gardaí were on duty in the court area. Bowden, an ex-soldier, identified Holland as the man known as the Whig. He was, Bowden says, a regular customer for significant quantities of cannabis from a drugs operation that has been described as on a massive scale. Bowden was the front man who collected the cannabis, brought it to the lockup at the Greenmount Industrial Estate and then repackaged it for distribution to customers. He kept lists of customers' names and the quantities ordered. Holland was listed by his nickname, the Whig, Bowden told the court. Bowden described himself as not heavy stuff. He said he cleaned and prepared the gun, a .357 Magnum used to kill Veronica Guerin. It had been brought in January 1996, concealed in a box of cannabis. He said he knew that Veronica Guerin was going to be shot or shot at to intimidate her, but didn't know she was going to be murdered. He also described the ammunition, brass bullets with silver heads, the tops turned in rather than pointed. They're known as dum-dum bullets, and he agreed under cross-examination that as an ex-soldier, he knew their devastating capability on a human being. Bowden is currently serving a 6-year sentence for drugs and firearms offences. He's been given immunity from prosecution by the DPP in connection with Veronica Guerin's murder, and both he and his family are now under strict protection. He said he has no knowledge of plans for his future following his release from prison. He was in the witness box for just over an hour and a half and was a cool and articulate witness. By court order, no sketches of him were allowed. The court also ruled that the names of accomplices mentioned by Bowden could not be revealed. His involvement in the cannabis industry made him a wealthy man. He admitted to saving £100,000 and maintaining a fine lifestyle. At one point, he owned a hairdressing salon operated by his girlfriend. Bowden was whisked away as soon as his evidence ended. The court is now hearing from a number of Gardaí who are giving evidence of unsigned records of interviews with Holland during his Section 30 detention in Lucan last April. The trial is continuing. Mary Wilson, RTE News, the Special Criminal Court.
Good evening and welcome. Patrick Eugene Holland, the man Gardaí believe murdered Veronica Guerin, took the stand today in his trial on drugs charges. He told the Special Criminal Court that state witness Charles Bowden had lied in court, as had Garda witnesses. Holland maintained that publicity surrounding allegations of his involvement in the murder had forced him to leave Ireland in 1996. Evidence in the trial has now concluded. Closing speeches will be made tomorrow.
Patrick Holland spent just an hour in the witness box on the final day of evidence in his trial on a charge of possession of cannabis for sale or supply. Questioned by his counsel, Brendan Grogan, he said that he was prepared to return to Ireland from England earlier this year to answer questions in relation to Veronica Guerin's murder, but distrusted Gardaí and wanted interviews recorded. In preparation for his return, he did some media interviews and fitted recording devices in his shoes. He claims that, contrary to Garda evidence that he answered questions at Lucan Garda station about his alleged involvement in drug dealing, he was never asked any questions about drugs. He claimed he was never cautioned, and Gardaí came to interview him in pairs and then had discussions amongst themselves. There was no record of interviews, he said, because there were no interviews. He denies he admitted any involvement in drug dealing, saying it's beyond belief that I would come home to face one thing and then admit to something else. Asked under cross-examination if he was saying that every one of the Gardaí who'd given evidence was lying, he replied, "I know it's hard to believe, and I know I'm not going to be believed, but that's what happened." He also claimed that 2 Gardaí had recited the Hail Mary during what they claim was an interview. This had to do with his mother, and he said it distressed him, and it was so weird he wasn't even going to repeat it. He claimed that Garda witness Charles Bowden, who said he was a regular customer for significant quantities of cannabis, had lied. Holland says he barely knew Bowden and had met him in connection with flyers for Bowden's hairdressing business. Holland had a printing company and suggested to Bowden that he distribute flyers at Bosaurus, offering cheap hairdos to countrywomen. Asked about his nickname, the Wig, he said that while it was possible he was called that behind his back, he was unaware he was ever referred to as the Wig. The bald accused admitted he did wear a wig at one time. The trial has now entered its final days and could conclude by Friday. Mary Wilson, RTE News, the Special Criminal Court.
But first, Patrick Eugene Holland, the man Gardaí believe murdered Veronica Guerin, has been found guilty at the Special Criminal Court of possessing cannabis for sale or supply. His sentence has been adjourned until tomorrow. Referring to the evidence of Supergrass Charles Bowden, who is now on a witness protection programme, Mr Justice Johnson said the judges were aware of the danger of accepting the uncorroborated word of an accomplice. But he also said the judges had not accepted Holland's claim in court that Gardaí had lied about interviews.
Known as Dutchy and the Wig, Patrick Eugene Holland was, by his own admission to Gardaí, a late entrant into the lucrative criminal world of drug dealing. Garda evidence accepted by the court as truthful revealed that he told them that at 57 years of age he was introduced to drug dealing by a high-profile drugs baron. He blamed financial difficulties and a desire to buy a dream home in County Wicklow. On trial for a drugs offence, it was the alleged links between Holland and the murder of Veronica Guerin that made this a headline case. It was also the first case in which evidence was given and accepted from a criminal on a witness protection programme. Charles Bowden, who admitted priming the gun used to murder the crime journalist, has been given immunity from any prosecution in connection with the Guerin investigation. He identified Holland as the Wig, a major player in a drugs operation he fronted. He said Holland received regular supplies of between 20 and 50 kilos of cannabis. The drugs were stored at a warehouse here at the Greenmount Industrial Estate, which was raided by Gardaí as a result of their investigations into Ms Guerin's murder. Holland was arrested at Dunleary Port last April on suspicion of the unlawful possession of a firearm at the Naas Road the day Veronica Guerin was murdered. He told the Special Criminal Court he'd left Ireland because of the publicity surrounding his alleged involvement, but returned to answer Garda questions. He claimed on that day he spent the morning in Dublin before picking up his dole in Crumlin, then collecting his wife and sister-in-law in Bray and returning to his County Wicklow home. The arresting Garda said in evidence she was of the opinion he was the man who had murdered Veronica Guerin. He was never charged in connection with his Section 30 arrest, but faced a drugs charge. The judges of the Special Criminal Court took just over 3 hours today to reach their verdict. Mr Justice Johnson acknowledged the dangers of accepting the uncorroborated evidence of an accomplice. The judges accepted corroborating evidence from Gardaí of statements made by Holland while in Lucan Garda Station admitting his involvement in drug dealing. The 3 judges were satisfied beyond a reasonable doubt that Holland was guilty as charged. Jimmy Guerin, a brother of Veronica Guerin's, was in court throughout the trial, sitting in close proximity to Holland. Holland will be sentenced tomorrow. A conviction under the Misuse of Drugs Act can carry a sentence up to and including life imprisonment. Mary Wilson, RTE News, the Special Criminal Court.
Well, Mary Wilson joins us now from the Special Criminal Court. Mary, what was the reaction of Holland and of the Gardaí to the judge's decision?
Well, throughout the 7-day trial, Dutchy Holland has been an active participant in his defence. He would become quite animated at some times, passing notes through his solicitor to his counsel, and having several consultations with them. There were several adjournments. When the judges announced their verdict today, he was sitting as usual in the dock between 2 prison officers, and when Mr Justice Johnson concluded and handed down the guilty verdict, Dutchy Holland nodded to him as though to say, "OK, I hear what you're saying." He then picked up a large brown paper bag which was full of files and walked out of the dock.
Well, what kind of sentence could the judge impose?
Well, under the Misuse of Drugs Act, which is the legislation under which Holland was charged, he could face a sentence up to and including life imprisonment. The Gardaí were not unsurprisingly delighted that they've got a guilty verdict in this case. It's the first time that they've used a witness such as Charles Bowden, who's on this witness protection programme, and it's expected that Bowden will be giving evidence in future expected trials surrounding the Guerin investigation.
Well, during the trial we heard various allegations being made about Holland's involvement in the Veronica Guerin murder. Is he likely to face any further charges?
Well, at this point, all I can say to that is we don't know. He was originally detained under Section 30 on suspicion of the unlawful possession of a firearm at the Naas Road on June 26, 1996, the day, of course, that Veronica Guerin was shot. He was never charged under that Section 30 arrest, but charged on a drugs offence. So we don't know at this point. It may happen at some stage in the future.
Mary Wilson, thank you for talking to us.